Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will tell you about an HOA that wants to have access to my warehouse. The place was originally my grandfather's workshop, a 50 by 80 steel building tucked behind a screen of poplars on the far edge of what's now my side yard. He refinished antique jukeboxes there for 6 decades, and the local real estate agent swore up and down that the HOA covenants, drafted years after Gramps poured the slab, had a carve-out recognizing the workshop as a grandfathered accessory structure. That clause was literally why I signed the purchase contract without blinking. I'd inherited the jukebox hobby, turned it into a niche refurb business on weekends, and I needed the space more than most folks need a living room. For the first 3 months, life was blissfully quiet. My neighbors waved when they saw me backing my trailer in to unload a rust-pocked Wurlitzer, and a few even stopped by for a short tour. I kept regular hours, respected the 9 p.m. cutoff, and installed enough acoustic insulation to make a rock band jealous. I thought I was the poster child for good neighbor, but that changed the morning a glossy envelope from the Heritage Oaks Association appeared wedged between a tool catalog and my coffee subscription box. Inside was a single-page notice of key request. The HOA's letterhead showcased a grinning oak tree, but the tone came off more chainsaw than shade. According to the missive, my excessively large storage facility was incompatible with individual use, and therefore, by some heroic leap of legal logic, designated as common property under Article 6, Section 4(b). Effective immediately, I was to produce 3 copies of every key, door, padlock, gate latch, and hand them over to the board so that all members may enjoy equitable access. The punchline? They gave me 48 hours to comply. At first, I laughed out loud. The idea that a private building predating the subdivision could morph into community space just because it was roomy felt like claiming a neighbor's oversized grill for a block barbecue. But the more I read, the more my jaw tightened. Article 6, Section 4(b) actually dealt with common maintenance of shared greenways. It mentioned nothing about facilities too big for personal use. Whoever drafted the letter was either malicious or profoundly confused. Still, I followed the golden rule of potential legal scraps: document everything. I snapped photos of the envelope, scanned the letter, and emailed copies to my buddy Ian, a real estate attorney who'd once untangled my parents from a property line fiasco. Then I strolled 2 doors down to chat with Mira, the nurse who baked cinnamon bread for new homeowners. She'd served on a previous HOA board before stepping down in disgust. When I showed her the letter, she rolled her eyes so hard it was audible. "Calvin's fingerprints are all over this," she whispered, referencing the current HOA president. "He tried something similar with the community garden, said plots over a certain size had to be communal. Got smacked down when folks reminded him gardens are literally encouraged in the bylaws. Same energy here." That afternoon, I sent the board a polite email. "I am in receipt of your notice. My workshop remains private property under both the subdivision plat and my recorded deed. The demand for keys has no legal basis. I am willing to discuss any genuine covenant concerns, but not under a 48-hour ultimatum." I copied Ian just to add the whiff of counsel. Calvin's reply arrived 20 minutes later, drenched in faux civility. He regretted my misunderstanding, reiterated the deadline, and warned that further non-compliance may lead to fines and legal escalation. The signature line ended with his favorite motto: "We keep Heritage Oaks harmonious." It was the passive-aggressive cherry on top. Things escalated fast. The next evening, while I was soldering a replacement amp board, my security cameras pinged. I checked the feed on my phone and saw 3 figures: Calvin, Trina, the treasurer, and some guy in a reflective vest poking around my workshop's side door. They rattled the knob, shone flashlights through the windows, and scribbled notes on a clipboard. I killed the lights inside, stepped out the front man door, and greeted them in the beam of my own mag light. Calvin adopted the politician's smile. "Evening, we're conducting a routine inspection of community assets." "Great," I said. "The assets are down by the gazebo, about 4 lots that way. This here's my workshop." The clipboard guy, later introduced as Dorian, the facilities liaison, gestured at the building. "But it's enormous. HOA guidelines limit accessory structures to 900 square feet. This is at least 4,000. I raised an eyebrow. Funny how the guidelines also exempt any structure built before the HOA existed. There's a certified letter from the county in my file that says so. My phone buzzed. Ian had texted a short gem. "Tell them to leave. Trespass warning." I read it, pocketed the phone, and calmly asked the trio to vacate my property. Trina sniffed. No need to be rude. If you're confident in your paperwork, just hand over the keys. We'll be out of your hair. I could feel the heat rising but kept my voice level. Not happening. You're trespassing right now. And as a courtesy, I'm giving you 30 seconds to go before I call the sheriff. They retreated, but not before Calvin delivered a parting shot. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Think of the community. I deadbolted the door behind me and spent the rest of the night installing an extra layer of motion alarms. The next morning, a new letter arrived. Violation notice, failure to provide common area access. Fine assessed, $150 per day, retroactive to yesterday. Calvin must have drafted it the moment he got home. My annoyance crystallized into resolve. There would be no quiet capitulation. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them a procedural smackdown they'd never forget. First, I filed a complaint with the county clerk's office, requesting a declaratory judgment that my workshop was private property exempt from HOA control. Ian helped me draft the paperwork. It cost a $260 filing fee and a Saturday afternoon flipping through dusty binders in the courthouse. Second, I joined the HOA Facebook group purely to gather intel. Calvin had set it to private, but membership required only an address inside Heritage Oaks. Once in, I scrolled through months of posts and found a thread from early spring. Calvin bragging about new rules to optimize land use. Comments revealed he'd floated ideas like communal RV parking in unused driveways and shared pools built on corner lots, if the lots exceeded personal recreational needs. Third, I talked to neighbors. Not everyone liked the workshop's industrial look, but most were incensed by the board's overreach. Mira organized a block-wide coffee chat on her porch and printed copies of the covenants for anyone who didn't have them. About 30 people showed. Several had their own grievances. Calvin denying lawn ornament waivers, Trina doubling late fee penalties without a board vote, Dorian passing off personal landscaping bills as common area beautification. As momentum built, Calvin doubled down. He ordered the HOA's pet security company to patrol the street outside my house every night, claiming concern over unauthorized use of the workshop. Not once did they set foot on my land. My no trespassing signs and camera warnings kept them at bay, but their headlights sweeping across my windows at 2 a.m. ticked off everyone within sight. The stress peaked on a Thursday when I returned from work to find a fluorescent orange sticker slapped on my workshop door. Notice of impending lock change, board authorized. It was dated for the following Monday. Under it in Sharpie, someone had scrawled, "You cannot use your warehouse alone." I peeled the sticker off, smoothed it onto a sheet of printer paper for the evidence folder, and called Ian again. "Is it time for an emergency injunction?" I asked. "Already drafted," he said. "I figured this was coming." Saturday morning, we filed for a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from entering, modifying, or otherwise tampering with my property. By noon, a circuit court judge signed it, and the deputy sheriff delivered copies to Calvin and the HOA's registered agent. The deputy explained in small words that ignoring the TRO could mean contempt of court. Calvin's face reportedly turned the color of undercooked salmon. Still, the board's daily fines kept auto-generating in the HOA's software. I ignored them and focused on the upcoming special meeting we'd forced by petition. 63 homeowners, well over the required 30% threshold, had demanded a vote to remove the entire board for gross overreach and negligent management. Mira, the nurse-turned-firebrand, became the public face of the recall. She canvassed door to door, distributing flyers that politely described Calvin's creative interpretations of property rights. Ian assisted pro bono, holding an impromptu Q&A in my driveway, so neighbors understood exactly why the workshop matter affected everyone. If the board could seize my building today, they could claim anyone's oversized shed tomorrow. Calvin attempted damage control by dropping flyers of his own. He portrayed me as a wealthy hobbyist hoarding space and painted the board as champions of communal fairness. That backfired when residents realized the board members had recently repaved their own driveways with HOA funds, calling the expense a storm drain improvement. The night before the special meeting, I slept poorly, half expecting their security patrol to attempt something stupid. Around 1 a.m., my motion alerts buzzed again, 2 silhouettes trying to pry a hinge pin from my side door. Instead of heading out, I quietly dialed the sheriff. Deputies arrived in 7 minutes and caught Dorian and an unlicensed locksmith red-handed. The workshop cameras captured everything, bolt cutters, a shiny new deadbolt in the locksmith's hand, even Dorian's sheepish admission that the board authorized it. The deputies arrested both on misdemeanor counts: trespass, attempted burglary, criminal mischief. The moment I heard the cuffs clink, a weight lifted. Whatever happened at the special meeting, the board's moral authority was toast. When dawn broke, I brewed a cauldron of coffee, wheeled my granddad's favorite jukebox, now restored and gleaming, onto the workshop's front apron, and set it to play swing tunes at conversation level. Neighbors trickled by, sipping Mira's cinnamon brew, admiring the craftsmanship and trading stories about Calvin's petty tyrannies. The vibe felt less like a rebellion and more like a community finally exhaling. At 6 that evening, the clubhouse overflowed. Calvin tried to chair the meeting, but a motion from the floor replaced him temporarily with an impartial moderator. The county clerk's office obliged us by sending a retired magistrate. Ballots were distributed and speeches began. I spoke last, keeping it short. I cited the deed, the TRO, the attempted lock change, the arrests, and the spiraling legal costs the board was racking up without member approval. Then I closed with a challenge. If my warehouse is common property, by your logic, any 2-car garage could be commandeered for neighborhood storage. How many of you want strangers rummaging through your power tools at midnight? The vote was counted twice, 81% in favor of immediate removal. Calvin stood stone still while the moderator read the tally. Trina's pen clattered onto the folding table. Dorian was still in county lockup, so a proxy recorded his silent number. A caretaker committee, 5 volunteers, including Mira, took over on the spot. Their first motion: suspend all contested fines until an auditor could verify legitimacy. Second motion: retain outside counsel to review the bylaws line by line. Third, authorize mediation with me to settle any residual claims. All 3 passed unanimously. When the meeting adjourned, the cheering spilled into the parking lot. Calvin slunk to his car, but before leaving, he delivered one last glower in my direction. I smiled back and raised my keyring, the only set that mattered. Back home, I locked up the jukebox, patted the steel wall, and exhaled. The war wasn't completely over. Paperwork never sleeps. But the tide had turned. For the first time in weeks, I let myself believe I might actually get back to solder fumes and swing music without looking over my shoulder. The caretaker committee's first week felt like someone had lifted a fog. Strangers waved again. Kids chalk-painted the sidewalks without a rule book tossed at their parents. And my camera alerts finally went back to raccoons instead of board members. Because the committee still needed a quorum for big decisions, they invited residents to open forums every other evening in the clubhouse. I went, not to grandstand, but because I'd learned the hard way that letting an HOA run on autopilot is like leaving a toddler alone with finger paint. During the second forum, Mira presented the auditor's preliminary findings on a projector balanced atop a card table. It wasn't pretty. Over 18 months, Calvin and the ousted board had reimbursed themselves nearly $27,000 for amenity upgrades that never materialized. One line item, storage facility security assessment, $1,850. Hit a nerve. That was the clipboard guy's midnight stroll through my shop. Another, driveway resurfacing, $4,500. Matched photos of Calvin's newly black-sealed asphalt. Gasps rippled across the room, followed by an almost collective murmur of "We're suing, right?" Ian, seated beside the projector, explained that recovery was possible through a civil action, but would require either a supermajority vote or voluntary repayment. A hand shot up in the back. An elderly man named Hank who'd lived in Heritage Oaks since day one. "Why not both?" he called. "Vote to authorize the suit and still ask Calvin to cough up the cash. If he's sensible, he'll pay. If not, the judge makes him." The motion passed with only one dissenting vote, Calvin's brother-in-law, who kept his eyes glued to his phone. 2 nights later, I was in the workshop stripping nicotine tar off a 1949 Seaberg when headlights swept across the gravel behind the building. My gut clenched. Old habits die hard. But the feed showed it was just a county code enforcement truck. A lone officer got out, clipboard in hand, measuring wheel dangling from a belt hook. He knocked politely, introduced himself as Officer Negron, and said a concerned resident had lodged a complaint that my workshop exceeded size limits and was unsafe for neighboring properties. I invited him in, offered hearing protection. He refused, apparently code folks live for decibels, and showed him every permit: the original 1961 county variance, the 2005 electrical upgrade, The fresh fire suppression certification I'd pulled after Calvin's first love letter. Negron checked my breaker labels, confirmed my extinguisher's inspection tags, and whistled at the spotless floor drains. "This place is cleaner than most restaurants," he laughed. "Report's going to say fully compliant." Just before leaving, he added, "Off the record, whoever called us was fishing. Happens all the time. Sorry to waste your evening." I texted Mira the news. Within minutes, she replied with a winking emoji and Calvin's flailing. "Keep receipts." The county misdemeanor docket moves faster than civil lawsuits, so less than 3 weeks after his midnight locksmith adventure, Dorian appeared before Judge Vu. I took personal time off work to attend, partly for closure, partly because curiosity's a powerful magnet. Dorian pled no contest to trespass and attempted criminal mischief. His attorney emphasized he was following board instructions and had no intent to steal, merely to secure community access. Judge Vu looked unimpressed. "Intent is irrelevant when you pry a private door at 1 a.m., she said, banging the gavel lightly. She sentenced him to 60 hours of community service, a $750 fine, plus restitution to me for the locksmith invoice I'd incurred to verify the door wasn't compromised. Outside the courtroom, Dorian shuffled up, hands shoved deep into khaki pockets. "Look, I was stupid," he mumbled. "Didn't realize Calvin was feeding me junk law." "I appreciate the apology," I said. "Finish your service, pay the fine, call it square." You'd think things would calm down, but the universe has a sense of humor. A local human interest reporter caught wind of a jukebox restoration guru in a legal battle with his homeowners association and emailed asking for an interview. I hesitated. Publicity draws gawkers and occasionally burglars, but Ian reasoned that daylight is a disinfectant. As long as I stuck to facts, avoided name-calling, and didn't defame, the board couldn't claim damages. The segment aired on a Friday evening, 30 seconds of me cleaning chrome trim, 30 more explaining how HOAs work when they work, and a final shot of swing dancers, friends of mine, twirling on the polished concrete. The story framed Heritage Oaks' recall as a community victory, not a scandal, and Calvin's name appeared exactly once, alongside the word ousted. Saturday morning, my inbox exploded. 3 people wanted me to restore jukeboxes they'd found in barn lofts. One offered to trade a neon diner clock plus cash for a 1957 Rock-Ola. Good problems, but problems nonetheless. I had a day job and limited weekend bandwidth. Still, a swelling client list made the workshop's future feel bigger than personal vindication. Predictably, Calvin filed a counterpunch. A defamation suit against me, Mira, and John Does 130, basically anyone who'd whispered that he'd misused funds. He claimed we'd ruined his reputation, cost him a pending promotion, and caused severe emotional distress. The filing landed on my doorstep like stale bread. Ian scanned it while sipping black coffee and chuckled. No specific statements identified, no damages quantified, and it targets a bunch of private individuals petitioning their HOA, SLAPP City. He meant strategic lawsuit against public participation. Suits meant more to intimidate than to win. Our state has a robust anti-SLAPP statute. Win an early dismissal, and the plaintiff pays the defendant's attorney fees. The caretaker committee voted to intervene, hiring a litigator who specialized in anti-SLAPP actions. Calvin had poked a bear wearing reading glasses and a CPA certification. While Calvin's suit simmered, the civil action for financial recovery barreled forward. Discovery unearthed receipts for a board retreat at a mountain resort, billed to the HOA's training budget. Photos on Trina's barely locked Instagram showed poolside cocktails labeled Hashboard Life. The attorney deposed each former board member. Deposition transcripts dripped with shifting stories and blame grenades. By mid-July, Calvin's counsel floated a settlement. Repayment of $15,000, no admission of fault, and a public statement that all parties acted in good faith. The caretaker committee rejected it in under 10 minutes. The judge scheduled a bench trial. Calvin blinked. 2 weeks before opening statements, he signed a consent order agreeing to repay the full $27,000, plus 9% interest, plus the HOA's legal costs. The order carried personal liability, no dipping into insurance or HOA funds. If he defaulted, the HOA could garnish wages. Neighbors rejoiced, though Mira reminded everyone it would still take months to collect. Hank suggested a tongue-in-cheek solution. Let Calvin do community service alongside Dorian. Maybe repaint our street signs. No one objected, but the consent order didn't grant us that poetic justice. With legal fires cooling, life pivoted to jukeboxes again. I took on a massive commission, a 1938 Wurlitzer Model 35 someone had found in a defunct skating rink. Its walnut veneer was peeling like sunburn, and the amplifier smelled like it had retired in a swamp. Perfect challenge. I spent evenings steaming veneer and rewinding field coils while swing and bebop hissed from a reference unit in the background. One humid night, the shop door cracked open and Hank poked his head in. "Heard you're the man to talk to about vintage audio," he said, stepping past the threshold like a kid into a candy store. Hank was pushing 80, thinner than a rake, but his grin could power a small town. He told me about meeting his late wife at a soda shop where this very model spun Glenn Miller. He wanted to surprise his granddaughter with the refurbished jukebox at her wedding reception next spring. That subplot, Hank's nostalgia project, became my emotional anchor while the legal machinery ground away. It reminded me that beyond property lines and covenants, community is neighbors cheering each other's weird passions. One morning I opened my email to find a scanned volunteer sheet. Dorian had requested to serve his community service hours helping me restore Hank's jukebox. The probation officer noted it fit the skill-building category. Hank was wary but ultimately left the decision to me. I mulled it over while sanding a walnut panel. Dorian had trespassed, yes, but he'd also owned up and paid restitution. Plus, the optics of turning him away felt petty, so I said yes under strict rules. He'd work only when I was present, sign a liability waiver, and start with basic tasks, labeling tubes, sorting hardware. Dorian arrived early, wearing steel-toe boots and a sheepish grin. The first hour passed in strained small talk. The second, he asked questions about vacuum tubes. By the third, he was soldering under my supervision, steady hands, and a genuine interest. Over the next several weekends, his confidence grew. One afternoon, during a break, he admitted Calvin had promised him a board seat in exchange for help asserting communal rights. "So I was chasing status," he confessed, wiping lacquer dust off his forearms. "Didn't realize it cost actual neighbors real peace." "Lesson learned," I said. September arrived with crisp mornings and a court date for Calvin's defamation suit. Our attorney filed an anti-SLAPP motion to strike. At the hearing, Calvin's lawyer tried to argue that calling someone corrupt on a petition flyer is per se defamatory. Our attorney countered, 1. The statements concerned a public issue. 2. They rested on factual documents, receipts, the attempted lock change, the arrests. 3. Calvin failed to identify any false statement. The judge needed barely 20 minutes before granting our motion, dismissing Calvin's complaint with prejudice, and ordering him to cover our legal fees, another $11,000. The gallery, mostly neighbors in silent support, released a collective exhale. Outside the courthouse, a reporter asked Calvin for comment. He spun on his heel and refused. The clip aired that evening next to stock footage of a judge's gavel. Viewers learned a new acronym, SLAPP, and Heritage Oaks became an informal case study in what not to do as an HOA board. Autumn settled, leaves burnt orange against blue sky, and the caretaker committee held an election for a permanent board. Mira declined to run. I like helping without the paperwork. But Hank joined, or rather was gently drafted, alongside 2 retired teachers, a software engineer and a stay-at-home dad who knew QuickBooks better than his own backyard. Their first act, adopting a respecting private property amendment, spelling out that grandfathered structures, regardless of size, remain under sole control of the owner unless that owner offers otherwise in writing. It required a 2/3 vote. It passed with 91%. They also voted to fund neighborhood improvements transparently, bids posted online, spending tracked monthly, audit reports emailed in plain English. Dorian volunteered for the landscaping committee and organized a Saturday tree planting, rather than writing checks to a cousin's consulting company. By December, the Wurlitzer stood reborn. Mahogany-stained veneer, gleaming chrome, meticulously recalibrated selector mechanism. Hank invited me and Dorian to his granddaughter Lily's wedding at a renovated barn venue on the outskirts of town. Watching Lily's eyes when she saw the jukebox, her great-grandparents' courtship soundtrack, was a punch straight to the feels. Near midnight, Hank leaned on his cane, tears reflecting colored lights from the jukebox grill. "You defended more than a building, son," he said quietly. "You defended stories." Calvin took a second job teaching online business classes to keep up with the repayment schedule. Rumor says he sold his boat and canceled a once-annual trip to Cabo. Trina settled her share of the judgment early. Turns out her new employer insisted on no loose ends. Meanwhile, the HOA's reserve fund swelled, inspections became mere check-ins, and block parties resumed without hall pass drama. My workshop? It's still mine, keys jingling in my pocket alone. But every third Saturday, I roll the doors wide and host Open Shop Day. Neighbors wander through, kids press flashing buttons, and occasionally someone brings a dusty jukebox looking for a second life. The unofficial rule is simple. Respect the tools, respect the stories, and remember fences are for keeping pets safe, not neighbors apart. I'd love to tell you that's the final chapter, but life rarely sticks the landing so neatly. Something else will test our little neighborhood. Maybe a short-term rental squabble or a drone noise complaint. But at least now we have the blueprint for pushing back without burning every bridge. Spring tiptoed into heritage oaks, coaxing crocus buds through winter-browned mulch and letting everyone pretend that lawsuits were a bad dream. My grandfather's steel-sided workshop smelled of lemon oil instead of legal dust, and for a few blessed weeks the loudest neighborhood quarrel was whether backyard chickens needed color-matched coops. The illusion shattered one Friday when 4 rideshare vans clogged Sycamore Circle like a pop-up carnival. Neon-painted college kids spilled out lugging coolers the size of bathtubs and streamed, not toward the clubhouse, but into the pale yellow cape 2 doors from Calvin's former place. Its owners, Bryce and Corey, were off on a Belize sabbatical. They'd told the board they had house sitters, but Vacation Vibes turned out to be a short-term rental startup that specialized in weekend ragers. By 10 o'clock, the cul-de-sac pulsed like a cheap music festival. LED wristbands blinking, vape clouds drifting, somebody filming rooftop drone shots. The new board had given residents an after-hours hotline, so I called. Dean, the stay-at-home dad who now kept the books, picked up on the second ring. Within an hour, the board held an emergency vote by group chat, taped a cease-and-desist notice to the front door, and rang the sheriff. Deputies arrived, cited the party for noise, and watched the revelers load their coolers back into vans. On Monday, Dean circulated the enforcement log. Bryce and Corey's place owed $3,500 plus a daily penalty until they either returned or signed a 6-month lease. They wired the money from Belize in record time, and every dime went into resurfacing the playground. The takeaway circulated on the neighborhood Facebook page. The rules finally protected everybody, not just the loudest voices. The rental fiasco faded, but Calvin's personal reckoning rolled on. Our consent order forced him to repay $27,000 he'd siphoned while president, fall short, and the HOA could lien his house. In March, he slid 45 days behind, mailed a cashier's check for half and a sticky note marked temporary liquidity issue, and discovered the board's backbone when council bounced the payment, recorded the lien, and notified his mortgage servicer. A week later, neighbors spotted his beloved bass boat shrink-wrapped with a for sale sign. By May, the overdue balance arrived in full. Actions meet consequences, sometimes on a trailer hitch. Just as gossip about Calvin went quiet, the county mailed notice of an easement adjustment. A new walking trail under the Healthy Cities Initiative was drawn straight through the drainage strip. But the map nudged the line north, so the back 6 feet of my workshop suddenly lay in public right-of-way. Old me might have panicked alone. Battle-tested me booked the clubhouse projector, invited every owner bordering the strip, and overlaid surveys proving the shift was a 2-yard drafting error. Lenora, retired science teacher turned night owl enforcer, pointed out that correcting it would also save the county on grading. We sent a signed packet to the commission. The engineer blinked at the evidence, blamed a GIS intern, and the board voted unanimous correction before ink touched plat paper. It was the first time many neighbors felt the HOA worked as their shield instead of their sword. June's heat delivered another test. Kara, a fitness influencer with 500,000 followers, applied to triple her garage into a mirrored studio. Under Calvin, she'd have been stonewalled for aesthetic disharmony, but the new board dealt in code compliance and measurable setbacks. They inspected, approved, and Kara sweetened the deal by offering 3 free senior fitness classes each week. By August, silver sneakers shuffled through barn-red doors to big band tracks streamed from one of my jukeboxes. 4th of July fell on a Saturday. Kids paraded trikes feathered in glittered eagles while I rolled a 1942 Rockola Commando onto the driveway. Coin mech set to free play. Dorian, once the midnight locksmith, now my volunteer apprentice, kept watch, joking that anyone who rocked the cabinet owed him sanding duty. Fireworks cracked above Calvin's dark windows. Hank ambled over, lemonade in hand, and laughed that the warehouse once branded too big for personal use now served the whole block entirely by choice. Friends, thank you. See you soon.